If you enjoy this podcast, don't forget to like and subscribe.
Special thank you to Landmark Coffee Roasters, a sponsor for this podcast. If you haven't tasted their coffee, you got to go check it out. Some of the best beans in Southern California. LandmarkRoasters.com. Ladies and gentlemen, Phillip MacIntosh in the Stoke House. Phil, you are lead pastor of Horizon Christian Fellowship in San Diego, California. You grew up in Calvary Chapel movement in a mega church with your dad as the lead pastor. You have been a pastor since 1999. This is 24 years.
Man, you're pretty good. You got some good stuff there.
And Phil, you are an off-roading, rugged camping outdoorsman with the built-out 90s Land Cruiser to prove it. I love that your profile name is Funky Preacher. I wish you could give me 1 ounce of your wit and humor. It'd make me a 10 times better preacher, no doubt. Phil, you are one of the band of brothers that I get to run alongside in ministry and glean from. You have served many years in practical boots-on-the-ground ministry. That's what I love watching from afar. International Crisis Hotline, chaplain with the San Diego Harbor Police, Chula Vista Fire Department, Chula Vista Police Department as well. In 2015, your dad, Pastor Mike MacIntosh, passed the baton to you to serve as lead pastor over Horizon Christian Fellowship after 40 years of ministry. And you're a good husband and a good father. You're married with 3 kids. And what I love about you most, Phil, is you've been around the ministry since you were a kid, since you were born. And you can see through all the fluff. And you still love the Lord, and you still love people. Genuinely. And that's rare. I'm blessed to know you, brother. Phil, welcome to the Stoke House.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Wow.
And
are you stalking me? How'd you get all that information?
You know what? I prayed, and God revealed Revelation. Yeah, Revelation. We're dressed up.
Yes.
It's Christmas time.
It's Christmas. Yes.
I think your sweater's ugly.
It's hideous. Yeah. So, yeah, and if you want one of these, it's available in any women's section in Walmart. Yes. So, and I should be careful saying that these days, but where I shop. But yes.
And who is this little guy on your shoulder?
We just named him Petey before the show.
Yes.
So
Petey.
Yeah.
So Petey is joining with us as well.
Yeah.
And so Merry Christmas to everybody listening.
Yes. Merry Christmas.
And Phil, we met, I think that one of the first times I remember meeting you is in D.C. I don't know if you remember this.
Yeah.
But then we were walking on the lawn there, and there were a bunch of random pastors out there at the prayer gathering that happened in D.C., and I meet Phil MacIntosh. This giant of a man comes up to me with the big paws. You gave me a handshake. And we got to talk for a little bit, and I just thought, like, man, I mean, I'd heard about your guys' work down in San Diego through Pastor Greg and Harvest, obviously, Calvary Chapel, but it was cool to get to meet you way back then.
Yeah, yes.
This has got to be maybe 5 years ago, 6 years ago or so?
Yeah, you're probably right, yeah.
Maybe somewhere around
Sounds
there.
right.
So you've been in ministry for 24 years now, is this right?
Yeah, I think It's hard to say. I was actually thinking about this just a couple weeks ago, going through kind of the timeline in my head as far as ministry, church, growing up in church. Mm-hmm. And it's funny, I was talking to my daughter the other night. I took her on a little date, Christmas date, and she was asking me about, we were talking about high school and talking about college and where she wants to go. And she started asking, because I didn't go to college. I went through our Bible program we had at our school. And she said, Dad, did you regret not going to college? And I said, I didn't regret it at all, because I knew what I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. And I was blessed to be able to jump right in it when I knew. And I was just sharing with her where many people are going to college to discover, what am I supposed to do? Where am I going? What direction am I going to take? And so I was just encouraging, when you know what you want to do, you go for it. Just go for it. So, yeah, it's been, I think I started actually not an actual official, on staff at our church, but I started working. We were, when I grew up, the church was we had a huge school campus that we leased from the city schools in San Diego. But I think at the age of 12, maybe around there, maybe a little younger. Actually, probably a little younger. I started working with our campus service guys, our maintenance guys. So they made me my own uniform. I drive. That's how I learned how to drive golf carts. From 12 to however old. And but yeah, growing up in it. And I think you hit a good point growing up in it, you see a lot of it, and you see the behind. And that's the thing is people tend to think there is this behind the scenes or behind the curtains of ministry. And I've learned through the years that if there is, then there's something wrong. If there's curtains, then there's something wrong. And I think that's one reason I've stayed in it, because I never really ever saw. Again, there's no perfect church, no perfect pastor,
right.
But was blessed to see, growing up with my dad, was blessed to see him come off the stage and see him be the same person he was up there at home. And I think that is one of the things that kept me from not running from it. So, yeah.
So you grew up in the Calvary Chapel movement, or your dad grew up, was he part of the Jesus People?
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. So he walked into Calvary Costa Mesa with, which he has a crazy, crazy story, and walked in after about a year and a half or 2 years of thinking part of his head was blown off, and went in and heard the gospel, went
Some
forward.
drugs?
Oh,
Drugs?
yeah. And they laid hands on him, prayed for him, and he instantly was healed that night. And just started immediately plugging into Calvary, and then went back and tried to convince my mom, hey, I got saved, and they were separated at the time, and because he was literally bona fide a crazy man. And I remember hearing stories. This was before I was born, but I remember hearing my mom would tell me stories of her brother, my uncle. Stay away from this guy. He's nuts. He's lost it. And one night, I think he knocks on our door and says, "Hey, I'm saved. I'm healed, and I want you to go to a baptism with me." And I think it took her a couple days to pray through it, and the Lord just showed my mom that, hey, I make all things new, and He is new.
Wow.
So crazy. Anytime, if you want to read a good testimony, For the Love of Mike shares his story, and it's pretty.
For the Love of Mike.
For the Love of Mike. Yep, pretty powerful.
Wow.
Yeah.
So this is a supernatural work. This is straight.
Oh yeah.
Supernatural Book of Acts stuff that happened in your family that kickstarted, a deep walk and commitment to Jesus, but then ultimately ministry. And your dad took the step of faith to just plant a church in San Diego?
Yeah, he was driving down. He was on staff at Calvary Costa Mesa. He was driving down once a week doing a home study. And it grew from 10, then it grew to like 50, then it grew to, we need to rent a space. And it got to the point where he really was like, hey, this is God's starting to work down here. And, I think for him that, and if you know Calvary, Chuck was always this father figure to these guys that started out. So I think for many of these guys to leave Chuck was a huge step of faith, because Chuck wasn't their savior or their God, but they looked at him. Many of these guys grew up, and that's what I love about Calvary. Most of these Calvary guys have these crazy stories and are the least expected men to be pastors, Right. And so that step of faith of saying, okay, I'm leaving Chuck. I'm leaving who became their spiritual dad in a sense. And my dad didn't have a good father figure. So Chuck was kind of that, okay, this is kind of like my spiritual father.
Got it.
So, but I think it was just supernatural what was happening down in San Diego. So he knew the Lord was saying it's time to go down and start something. So yeah. And from there it just started 10 to 100 to 1,000 to just awesome things. So I think over the last, we're close to 50 years now. I think 125 churches have been planted, and
wow,
just
praise God.
Awesome stuff. Only the Lord could do. Yeah.
Well, if a man walked into our church, let's just say in his early 20s, and was saying he's missing half his head, and we're like, okay, let's get the guys together. Let's anoint him with oil. Let's pray for him. Believe God. We would never project in a million years that he would be the guy to go start a church, plant 125 churches, 40 years of ministry, raise up his son, pour his life into him, takes over you know what I mean? All this ministry. Look, the compounding is just incredible. The multiplication of fruit. And God does it through the guy who walks through the door that you just don't. That's the last guy, right, sitting there in the pew.
The guy you call your security team for. These guys will pray for you over here.
Yeah, they're going to lay hands on you. Yeah. Wow. So, grew up in San Diego.
Grew up in San Diego. Yeah. San Diego I will say this, San Diego is a hard place to leave. And there's been, in ministry, as far as, there's really only been probably 2 to 3 times throughout ministry where God has presented something else. And every single time it's been, I feel like, and maybe you listening today have been in this place before where God's stirring something in your heart or calling you somewhere. And I've learned for me, it's always been just God doing it just to see if I'm even willing to step out to that point of saying, okay, God, whatever you want, I'm willing to let go. And for the longest time, I think for me growing up in the church, the enemy, especially for people, I think I see this a lot for those who have grown up in the church and then start to pastor, especially if you are in a family of you take over for your father, like I have. The enemy definitely messes with your mind a lot as far as, you just grew up in this. This really wasn't your call. This is just something you did, and over the years, I love it. People, when I was younger, would come up and say, "You're just doing this because your dad wants you to have a project,"
Yikes,
or your dad, and so church ministry was always kind of like I thought, like, oh, this is the thing that maybe the boat I'm staying in that I need to get out of, and those opportunities God always used to show me that no, this is where I want you, but I just want to see if you'd be willing to look to even consider anything else. But San Diego, is definitely a hard place to leave, but it's becoming, as many, LA is probably just as expensive, but San Diego, I think, has been named now the most expensive place in the world.
No.
So it's crazy.
Are you kidding me?
So, I saw there's a little community, well, not too small, but a community called OB that's in San Diego.
Okay.
Somebody was renting a tent for $900 a month in their backyard.
No.
Yeah. So,
what?
And it was totally legit on Craigslist, and it was a full, big tent with connected to a deck, so you had a little sitting area. But I was like,
hilarious.
Only San Diego,
right?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you grew up in the church, grew up in San Diego, brothers and sisters.
Yeah, and all of them are kind of spread all over right now. But yeah, grew up in a family of 5, and then 5 siblings, and then at the age of probably like 13, my dad and mom sat us down and shared with us that when my dad was, I believe, 17, had a child, and they found her. So then had 6 siblings.
Wow.
So yeah.
Wow.
So I was an uncle at the age of, I think, 13. I became an uncle. I was like,
amazing.
Yeah.
You're what number in the rank here?
Youngest.
You're the youngest.
Yes.
The baby.
Yes. Yeah.
Baby Phil, man. Okay. And did you go to high school, public, private?
Private.
Did you go to Horizons?
Went to Horizon.
Huh,
yeah.
What was that like? I mean, you're the son of the guy who runs the thing.
Yeah, it was high school for me was a season of it was a tough season. Junior high school were hard years for me. And I knew probably in around the 6th grade, we had career day at school. So for years, I always struggled with, okay, I want to be a cop, I want to be a pastor, and I want to be, I think, a jet pilot, fighter pilot was my 3 things. So for career day, I finally said, okay, this is what I want to be. I showed up at career day in a suit with a pulpit and a Bible. And I was like, all right, so this is what I want to do. Junior high, and high school, for me, were years of a lot of doubt. Really started to doubt God. And kind of like when I was just earlier sharing about my daughter and talking about things that you're called to do, it was probably around 18 that the Lord was like, hey, you were always made to do this, and you need to come back to this. And I got a phone call from another pastor's kid, and she called me up, and we had a program at our church called the School of Evangelism, and it was a 9-month deal. You would go and do classes during the day. You would do a month-long practicum somewhere around the world. Lots of outreach, lots of different opportunities, and I grew up around it. So when we would go do missions trips, all these students would be, 100 of them would be on the trip with us. But when I started kind of veering from the Lord and doubting Him, I started to see these people who would leave all and join this program, and I started to think these guys are kind of wacky. Like, why would you quit your job? Why would you do this? And it was something told myself, I'm never going to go through it. I'm never going to do it. So this girl calls me, another pastor's kid, and she says, I feel like I'm supposed to go. I think you need to go. And this was at the kind of, for me, a pivotal moment of really, all right, I'm not doing anything with my life. I've not walking really with the Lord, and then all of a sudden I get a call from another guy who was another pastor's kid who was earlier previous to that, not walking with the Lord. And he was like, what, I feel like I'm supposed to go too. And they had like a week-long open house thing to come, and you'd hear teachers and kind of make your decision at the end of the week. And I said, all right, I'll give it the first week. And then and then I hit week 2. All right, I'll give it week 2, but I'm not going to go do their wilderness trip. I'm not going to go do this. And then I found myself on the wilderness trip, So for me, that was at the age of, I think, again, right at the turning 18. And I got to the point at that stage in my life where, and I see a lot of young people in this stage, fear kind of dictated a lot of things. And fear creates that attitude of like, I'm not going to do that,
right.
And you start to dig deeper and go, well, you're not going to do it, or you don't want to do it because of fear,
right. Right.
I hear this a lot with young people, this mentality of like, they are so unique that nothing will really work for them, or I can't fit in that, or that I hear it a lot where people say things like, you don't understand, I'm not wired like that, right. Or that program or that book wouldn't work for me, or the right. Bible won't work for me because I'm just different than everybody else. Right. And I found when you dig deeper, that's just a cop-out because of fear. Like I'm really, when it comes down to it, I'm fearful to do it. Right. So for me, that was like the first thing in a long time in my life that I did not want to do, that I did. And went through it. We had a class of like 65 people in that program, and we finished with 10 after 9 months. So it was a lot of like weeding people out, and I'd grown up in the ministry, so I knew. And again, I knew when there was wackos and right. phonies. And right. I remember the second week. I remember this guy we'd have our breaks, during classes. He was out anointing all these girls, on break before we go into the next class. Can I pray for you? Can I anoint you with oil? And I here I am. I haven't, read the Bible in a long. I'm getting back into the Bible, and I'm like, wait a second. I know there's a verse about anointing people with oil. Oh yeah. And I dig it up, and I'm like, wait a second. Here it says, go before the elders. Yeah. I'm like, are you an elder? He's like, no. And I'm like, what are you doing anointing people with oil? He's like, oh, well, I remember he was gone after week 3. Wow. It was crazy. One by one, God would use this program, and it was a tough program. It was like we went on a 7-day wilderness trip. For me, I never grew up camping. Camping for us was like going out and trying it, and then being like, all right, we should go find a hotel. I remember we did a houseboat. That didn't work. Yeah. We did a houseboat when I was a kid. And if my dad hears this, he's going to be mad that I shared the story. But we go to Lake Powell, which now I'm like, dude, my goal is like, I want to get my family to Lake Powell on a houseboat. Lake Powell, man. That place is sweet. And we went with another family who had like their own boat captain who came. Like the whole setup, right. Everything, a mechanic, right. So they have the big boat. We have a little one. We're going along with them. So my dad gets the idea of, we can do it next year by ourselves. I'm like, all right. So we're out for like 4 hours, and he can't dock it. He can't, we have jet skis we're towing behind. Yeah. And we look back, and they're completely sunk underwater. No. And so it was literally that day we turned around, and he's like, all right, I'm going to try to see if they'll give me a full refund for this whole deal. So we're at a hotel that day, first day. And we all looked at each other, like, all right, this is how we camp, I guess. This is how we camp. So that program, 7 days. Wow. Camping, and for me, I camped maybe twice as a kid. It's just something we didn't do. And this trip was like, no toilet paper, no bathrooms,
Whoa.
no, no one could bring a watch, no. Back then it would have been an iPod, but
Wow.
or not even an iPod, but and basically kind of just no tents. You could bring
Wow.
a sleeping bag and,
So you're
basically
out-
a tarp.
You're out in the elements.
You're out in the elements, and then they do. You hit like day 5, and they're like, "All right, now you go by yourself for 24 hours."
Whoa.
And I was like, "All right."
Whoa.
And so that for me was one of those pivotal moments again, where I was like, "Okay, I'm going to do this, but there's no way I'm going to do that 7 days out there." So
What's the primary objective of like doing? Is this to?
for people to die? No, I'm just kidding. No, yeah.
Is it pushing them like into manhood or womanhood?
You know,
kind of
I think
responsibility and like
teamwork, I
Yeah.
think, is the first aspect of it, because
Yeah.
you're relying heavily on each other. And then I think that whole solo time where you're by yourself is really just to say, okay, because a lot of people, including myself, at that point we're like 24 hours alone, like no one around, no access to anything.
like I've never done that ever.
Yeah. So, it was an awesome experience, and I think the team building aspect of it was huge.
What was that 24 hours like for you?
It was hilarious because so I'm like, terrified to go to bed, right? Go to sleep. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to go to sleep when it's still light out. So no tent. I get my sleeping bag. I'm shoved up against these rocks, and I'm building in my mind like, okay, I've got nothing. I'm out just laying in the dirt, and fall asleep. I wake up. I don't know what time I woke up, but it was morning time. I had somehow rolled like 100 yards from where I went to bed, and I was just laying. I woke up laying in the dirt, no sleeping bag.
No.
And I was like, all right, how long have I been here?
Oh my gosh.
So even that trip, I mentioned we had 60 people. One guy on that trip, he took off and he hitchhiked home.
Whoa.
Like we never saw him again.
Wait, where was this at?
Usually they would do Death Valley.
Okay.
This one we had Idlewild, so it was up in the mountains.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and I think I could be wrong, but there's a hike you get up to the top of the hill. I think it's called Devil's Peak or Devil's Slide.
Yeah.
So, I'm a total dork, and I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna run it.
Yeah.
Right. So, so I'm running, and it's like 20 minutes in, I'm like, leg cramps.
No.
And literally like 2 girls had to like help carry me the rest of the way. So that was my first experience of, truly being humbled and that teamwork aspect.
So you're 16, 17, 18.
Right then that was 18.
18.
Yeah. Yep.
Got it.
Yeah.
I love this.
Yeah.
We need more of this.
Yeah.
These things, I don't know, they like push you beyond your boundaries
Totally.
as a kid, and they like make you wake up to the realities around you, like it really, like what a single week could do to like reprogramming, the child to man, the girl to woman, and just thinking, because, we're so sheltered, we just don't live like people did for the last 1,000 years, not even close, or thousands of years. And we have so many accommodations, amenities, like we are living in luxury day and night. But again, to go out there, and it does something to you. I mean, I even think from the angle of the Lord, just being alone out there, and just starting to think and listen, and just to be quiet with your own thoughts. I mean, adults don't do this for 24 hours, how special it is if we do, but I love this. So this is part of the story, though. This is part of your coming to Jesus moment, or where the lights are turning on, where you're waking up. You're getting to come into close relationship with God. How did all of this unfold? Is this part of the journey or process?
Yeah, I think at the age of 10, and I think for me, one of the awesome things that I look back on and I try to do with my kids, but definitely have not been able to do enough of. And just opportunities or whatever may unfold. But and also I look at where our church is today, and we're in a different place than when I was 10 years old and where my dad was. And but he out of all the kids, because I was the youngest, and most of my siblings had moved out or were in high school, college. he would usually take me on his trips. So wherever, I mean, I grew up, from probably the age of like 8 to 17, pretty much going on almost every trip he would go on. So if it was Russia, China, the Philippines, for me, he took me to the Philippines at the age of 10, and we went to a place called Smoky Mountain, which is a dump. It's like this mountain that's basically a dump, like the city dump. And I forget how many thousands of people at that time lived in the dump. So that was my first encounter, like seeing little kids.
Crazy, man.
With, hardly any clothes on, drinking from sewage water. I mean, just living in, it was the shambles of shambles. And I remember, being we lived literally 10 minutes from the border of Tijuana. And I remember 20 years ago, and you still drive into Tijuana and you still see homes that are made out of cardboard and plywood sheets. Right. But Tijuana, we were just down there, my wife and I were down there 3 nights ago, and it was like Tijuana is a different place. I mean, it's like you got high rises everywhere.
Oh, wow.
And so this was my first encounter, like seeing true poverty. True poverty. And there's poverty. I mean, don't get me wrong, in Tijuana, but and that trip, there was we would do these. He would do crusades, nightly crusades, and we were in Manila. And I think the first night, 75,000 showed up. Wow. It was crazy. I'd never seen that many people in my entire life.
How in the world? I mean, there's just the word gets out, and just everybody shows up.
Yep. And then we went to another city,
unreal,
called Bacolod, and there, like, again, this was my exposure. I was seeing all these people get saved, and we're getting home. And again, this is the thing about missions that you get this exposure, and then your team goes back, and everybody goes back to a hotel. Right. And you're like, all right, I got a bed, I've got clean water, I've got. But we get back one night. We're getting in the elevator, and I'll always remember this story. But we're getting in the elevator, and some of the team had gone to a village that day. And one of the guys who hops on the elevator that night with us, he was basically picked to share his testimony in this village. So they get to this village. I don't know how far they had to drive to get there. It was hours, and the translator has not shown up. So the translator is about an hour late. And at some point, he just says, "I need to just go for it. I can't wait any longer." So the whole village gathers around. He goes up. He starts just sharing his testimony, preaching the gospel, speaking in English, gives an altar call, and sure enough, right when he gives the altar call, almost the whole village comes forward. And when he's giving the altar call, the translator shows up, and he walks up and goes, "What happened?" And he goes, "You were late. I just went for it, and I just preached in English." And the translator started going and talking to everybody in the village. I said, "No, he was speaking in our language." Oh my God! And he was in the elevator with us, telling us this, and I'd never seen anybody that excited or lit up. And he was just like, "You're not going to believe what happened to me. I was speaking English." Then he shows up and finds out they all heard it in their own language. Wow! And so that trip for me was like somebody. I don't know if there was another a pastor at our church who has a tape of this, but I think at like 10, from that moment on, whenever we do the nightly gatherings, crusades, altar call, I was like, I'm going to go. I want to pray for people. I want to. Wow. And so all these kids would just come up, and I would just, at 10, I'm like, "Hey, do you know where you're going to go if you die tonight? Wow. You're going to go to heaven or hell. Wow. Okay, you want to go to heaven? Let's pray." So fast forward to 18 and that wilderness trip. That was really, for me, that whole experience was God bringing me back to, I think, when I was 10. Wow. And saying, again, this is who I made you to be.
Praise God.
And that's the amazing thing about Jesus, is that again, the prodigal son, it's like, and I never, I look at my brothers and think, okay, they were the prodigals. I wasn't the prodigal. They were the prodigals. They had to get bailed out. They had to get, rescued from this or that. And I had my things, but for me, I think it was more of not running necessarily into, and again, everyone's a sinner, but not running into like, I'm going to rebel against God because I just want to do that. But it was just, I'm going to run from what I know I'm supposed to do. Right. So that experience was really, I think, him saying, "Hey, this is who you were made to be. and who I still want you to be. So just the fact that he lets us still be, gives us that chance again to say, okay, I see it. I see it. Not only do I see it, but I want that, and I want to do it.
That's good.
Yeah.
Praise God. As you reflect back on your childhood, again, growing up in this atmosphere, you're a pastor's kid, your dad's in the ministry, you're going on missions trips. When you reflect on all of that experience and now being a pastor and trying to love and serve your kids, and have tried to love and serve your kids, over these years, I don't know, you said something to me, Phil. I don't know if you remember saying this, but you said something to me that I'll never forget. You said something like, never stop praying with your kids. Just don't ever stop doing that, and you'd made reference to yourself, to which I was thankful. And you shared some insight, but you just said, just keep praying with your kids. If you can do that, just keep doing that. Don't stop doing that each night. And so I've tried to do that, but I am nervous about this process of raising my kids in the church. They're secret prayers like, God, why'd you do this? Like, why do they got to be PKs? Like, why can't I just be a business guy who does this over here? My kids, we get to they get to discover Jesus a different way. Why do they got to go through the whole, all the stuff? And so, I think I'm on an endless pursuit to try to continue to hone, how I can love and serve my kids, and things to do, things not to do, and like as you reflect on your experience, maybe things that you felt you've done well, or things you felt your dad did well, or things that you've seen other pastors, or things go wrong, or things you've adjusted on the fly. I'd love to hear any of that stuff.
Yeah, it is that whole idea, or the whole necessity of praying with our kids. I think it kind of resonates as well, I think, even with our spouses. And I don't know about you, but this happens in my head. Well, first off, I think people assume that pastors' homes are like these angelic places that you walk into, and everybody's gathered around every day singing worship songs together. And I remember my mom. I just did this the other night. I was doing this, but I will do this impersonation of my mom, because I remember my mom. She would be like, "Philip, Jonathan," screaming at us, and then the phone would ring, and in the midst of "Philip, Jonathan, hello," it's like. And the reality is, it's like our homes are just like everybody else's homes,
yes.
And there is a pressure, I think, that's put on, definitely by people. And I would encourage you, if you're someone who, you're plugged into a church, and if you've ever found yourself putting pressure on a pastor's kid, it is, I would highly discourage you from doing it. Mm-hmm. When I started, after that whole program of the School of E, from there I jumped right into ministry, and I started traveling to churches. And you mentioned we had this crisis hotline for teens that we had going for years. And I actually started answering it when I was 12, which was crazy, because I'd answer it and they would be like, are you a guy, girl? You're how old? You're 12 and you're 10, so at 19, I immediately dove back into that and started running that ministry, and would travel to churches and get churches on board to volunteer to answer the phones. And I remember visiting a church, and I remember I had just spoke, they would give me, pastors would give me 5 minutes before the message, hey, you can share about your ministry. And I, people knew who I was. I'd go to Calvary's, and they knew who my dad was. And I remember right after the service, this guy comes to me and goes, that's the pastor's son over there. I was visiting this church. Can you believe, look, he paints his nails black. He's, we got to pray. He's just going through. And I said, you know what? Who cares? I'm like, there might not be anything wrong with him. He might be fine. Right. You don't know, And I just remember encouraging the guy as a pastor's kid, like, you know what? You just need to love him like he's anybody else. Yes. Why do you put this expectation on him? And I can do that with my own kids, and I think for me, the expectation is they're going to just follow suit and be in love with the Lord. And I grew up hearing people, well, hey, how is it having your dad be Mike Mac? And I would turn to him, and you made a comment a little earlier, and I would turn to him and I would say, well, how is it having your dad be Bob the plumber? or Frank the accountant. What's the difference, you know?
Right.
So I think there is a unhealthy pressure that's put on. And then there's also this persona of pastor kids are always rebellious. You know, they're going to be crazy and rebellious. And there's a lot of them I know that are, you know, that are. And I do believe, we're no different than anybody else. You know, and then I truly believe when we get to heaven, we're not going to see Greg Laurie's mansion over here, Billy Graham's mansion over here, and you're over that. No, we're all going to be right before the Lord. Yes. There's no rank. There's no who had a bigger church or who had more followers or who. So there's just this. First off, the pedestal of putting pastors on is totally wrong. I tell people if they're looking for a perfect church, get in your car and leave, because as soon as I pulled in this morning, it was no longer a perfect church. When we had our schools going, we would get a lot of parents bringing their kids that were not Christians. The parents were not Christians, and they had this mentality of, the Christian school will raise my kids.
Right.
You know, they'll teach them how to be good.
Right.
And I would tell them, if you're looking for a perfect school, this isn't it, because I let my kids out of my car this morning, and they came onto this campus. And as soon as they came onto this campus, it's no longer perfect. But so I think there's just this unhealthy. And I'm going to say this might ruffle feathers, but I honestly 100% blame it on pastors. I really do. I think pastors need to do a better job of transparency of who am I? Like, who am I? And I think letting the biggest in ministry, the biggest thing I've seen that God has used is our own turmoil and our own storms to be able, because then you're able to minister to people in a way of not like, hey, I've gone through this, I can help you, but I now fully can understand what you're feeling to where before I couldn't. And I think when people find out, oh, you have a son that isn't walking with the Lord, that's and it opens their heart and their minds to see that, okay, no one's immune. No one's immune to, and I love that our Savior said that. He said, you're going to have storms, you're going to have turmoil, you're going to have tribulation. Never once did Jesus candy coat the gospel and say, it's going to be smooth sailing from here on out, guys. Right. So I think, I going on kind of a tangent, but I really think us as pastors and pastors in general, we need to do better at ensuring that there's never this, this perception of, gosh, they've got it all together, and obviously we should have it together because of what we do.
Sure.
But just the realness of this might sound weird, but when people leave the church, one of my favorite things to do is to meet with people who are leaving the church. Because the worst thing is when someone leaves a church, and the reality is this: every church people leave and they come and go. Big churches, you just don't see it because there's so many people. Smaller churches, you see it because there's not a lot of people.
Totally.
And I can prove that because we're not a big, huge church. We have churches that have gone out from us over the years that are big, that when they went out, 500 to 1,000 people went with them, and I'm a testament to, and not to discredit any church, but people come back from those churches. Yeah, we just knew it was time to come home, or we knew it was, whatever the reason. So people come and go, but I love hearing the opportunity of, okay, why are you leaving? Versus, hey, where'd they go? Like, it's been 3 months I haven't seen them.
Right.
Did they not like me? Right. Did somebody upset them? Did they? And then you can walk through that process, like of, okay, did I do something wrong? Oh, I didn't? And then okay, or I did. Oh, okay, what did I do wrong? And it's funny, over the years, I try to make myself as available as much as I can to people. Over the years, I've had people leave and they'll say, well, you weren't here for this. You didn't show up for that. And I, humbly was sorry. But also, I think maybe you've put a little too much expectation upon me.
Right.
That I'm to be And in any way, or were you looking to me to be the one to carry you through that?
Right.
I will be there with you. I remember growing up in the ministry, my dad would always say, the ministry of presence is so much more powerful than the ministry of words. So like you go to a hospital visitation, and just being there, people will remember that for the rest of their life.
Wow.
Like you were there,
Wow.
right? And hospital visitations have always been a hard one for me.
Same.
They have been, and I'm kind of like a bull in a china shop. When I go to a hospital, I'm like, did I trip over that cord? Did I unplug that machine? What am I? Do I go in now? Do I wait till the nurse comes out?
Right.
And then whenever I just go in and I'm there, I'm like, okay, Lord, this is where I'm supposed to be because you're here. But I've learned too that there's times where people can put just a little too much expectation. And even for me, this was a struggle too. When even before our transition at our church, I was starting to do more and more, even before we even knew, like, hey, we're going to transition or announced it to our church. It was just kind of naturally I would take on more, like start overseeing this, start teaching more. And my dad was still obviously the senior pastor, still kind of running things, and I found myself, I would be like, hey, wait a second. And this might sound wrong, but I would be like, if somebody were like, hey, you weren't there. Like, well, wait a second, I'm not your pastor. He is. Why are you mad at me? Be mad at him, And I grew up, and I would see people, well, I could never be mad at him, but there would be more of like, you are not as busy as him, so you should have been here, or you should have, So I've learned through that, like, one, I need to be present as much as I can be, but I also know that I'm a human being. And first and foremost, I'm going to try to put my family always first. And that's been hard for me over the years. My bio, you mentioned, rattled off like Chula Vista Police, Chula Vista Fire.
Yep.
Chula Vista Fire, I became a chaplain with them right after 9/11. And we moved down to Chula Vista, and it was just kind of a natural fit. And it got to a point where I found myself almost every like fire, promotion, graduation ceremony, anything going on, it was like I was there. I'd get in my Class A fire uniform, think I was, all cool, had my gold badge, and would go to these ceremonies and be there, and then knew that I can't stay afterwards. I got to get, because there's something going on with my kids, or I got to get, and there was this constant struggle.
I see.
And they saw it too. Yep. They were like, we need you here. Like, we want you to be and the fire industry is crazy. They're like, it's close knit. They all live in a house together.
Yeah, they're married to it.
It's totally different than police. Police, you get a guy in a car by himself for 13 hours. Fire, you got 4 guys in a house that are just total goofballs that are going and saving the world.
Right.
So it was always a struggle of like, okay, I want to be full in, but I also have, I'm helping run a high school, school. I've got my kids. I've got, so there were times where it's just like, I'm sorry, I can't do it. So learning what our limitations are, but then also people in the church going, they have limitations.
Yes.
They have limitations.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I grew up in the church and then I started serving in the church, my dad's assistant pastor, he was a machine, like just oiled machine, worked. And when I started getting more involved in overseeing things and leadership, I found myself trying to compete with him. Like, I got to be as busy as him.
Wow.
I got to be doing as much as he's doing.
Right.
And then I realized, well, what's his secret? He had this like 90s shag van, like this cool camper van. And I found out he would go out and take like a 15-minute nap at like 2 every day.
Nice.
He would take a 15-minute nap, come back in, work till like 8.
Yeah.
And then I remember I was sitting in his office with another guy from the church, and this other guy was mad at me because I didn't follow up on an email. And I was probably 24 maybe at the time. And email's my detriment. So email is So, and sadly, people have left our church because you didn't respond to my email. And I'm like, well, you have my phone number, dude. Right. I'm sorry. I didn't check my email. Right. So I remember sitting there and he was like, you need to be punctual. I'm like, you're right. You need to be more like him. And he pointed to this, my dad's assistant pastor. I was like, well, I'm like, he has 2 assistants, right? I don't have a secretary. I don't have an assistant. I don't have anybody to. So I would find ways to be like, hey, and then God would be like, yeah, but you also could be better. You could be better. But yeah, the whole expectation, is, and I blame that on myself, and I blame that on pastors of this whole, so far along a tangent there, but yeah, the whole praying with our kids and all of that. I think my expectation has changed to where like, all my kids are older now. My oldest is our youngest is 17, almost 17, and one's out of the house, one's working full time. So we're in a totally different season.
Yep.
And I'm getting back to where I ran away from. But I remember when they were kids, I would go in, pray over them, pray with them when they're going to bed. And the same thing, I think this happens with our spouses. Like we pray together. I'm a firm believer that a couple that prays together stays together. I've seen, and this might sound weird, but when we do our premarital counseling at our church, one thing we never covered, and we had like 8 sessions, that they would meet with different pastors on. One thing we never covered was intimacy. And I felt like the world has stolen sex and intimacy and turned it into such garbage.
Right.
That the church needs to redeem it and talk about it in a healthy biblical way, not in a weird way.
Sure.
So I was like, I want to take on the topic of intimacy.
Yep.
And I have learned prayer in marriage creates so much intimacy.
Wow.
That, but at the same time, I know that if I let a night go by and then another night go by and another night go by where I haven't instigated or instituted, hey, let's pray together. The devil gets in, and this is what the devil does for me, I know. He gets in my head and says, dude, it's been a week since you prayed with her. She's going to think, oh, what, now all of a sudden you want to be a holy roller and pray with me? When really my wife's laying there going, Lord, I just wish he would pray with me. I wish he would just pray with me. But in my head, I'm wrestling with, it's been 4 days since I've prayed with her. If I pray with her now, she's going to think, oh, what, now you want to be Christian man? You want to be pastor guy at home now? So the devil plays that. And with my kids, he's done that a lot, as they've grown, like, and I set myself up sometimes to fall.
Sure.
I told the 2 that are home, I told them last week, I'm like, okay, listen, December, right? 24th is Christmas Eve. We're going to read a chapter of the Gospel of Luke every day together, and we'll get through the whole life of Jesus. I think we're at chapter 4.
Nice. Hey, you got the Christmas story in.
So here I set myself up. They're looking at me going, yeah, right, Dad. And life happens. My son gets off at work at 10, usually at night. He rolls in. I'm like, dude, good to see you. I'm going to bed. I'm tired. And then I realize, okay, God, you're gracious. You're gracious.
Yes.
So I think the more I've learned over the years, the more I can expose them, like my dad did. Hopefully they will see it and know that it's real.
That's good.
It's tough.
Yeah.
My daughter one time said to me, because I'm critical of I'm very guarded with there's so many churches in California.
Right.
In San Diego, where we moved, when we had to leave our campus almost 8 years ago, we moved into a smaller neighborhood, probably 10 minutes away from where we were. And the 5 years we were there, like 4 churches popped up when we were there.
Wow.
And I tell people, there's go somewhere else. There's too many churches in San Diego. There really are.
Right.
Where we're like encroaching on each other's turfs.
Right.
And I know we're all one body.
Yes.
But people will say, hey, why didn't you let this guy come preach at our church? I don't know him. I'm not going to let him preach at our church. I don't know. Well, and I have found, I don't know if you see this, I've found, I'm going to just throw this number out there, it's probably high, but maybe 75% of new startup churches are young guys who have a chip on their shoulder and they're bitter at something that happened to the church they were serving at. So they said, I can do it better, and I'm going to go start my own church.
True.
So I tell people, you want to go to a church that's being started by a guy who has not resolved a situation, has not done a Matthew 18 with the last place he was
Doesn't
at.
have a good relationship. Yeah.
And that's where you want to go, to a guy, I could do it better than them, or I can. So I'm very guarded. And I remember there's a church, I'm not going to say on Sunday mornings, if I talk about churches, I'll say, I'm not going to say the name, but then I'll say it anyway. But there's a church in San Diego, and they're starting to spread all over, but they're definitely, they're connected to Hillsong a little bit, but very prosperity, very, and I know kind of behind the scenes, they have curtains, major curtains that I've heard about, from people who've worked there. And during COVID, I know COVID was a hard time for most churches. They, I think, really ployed on that. And, if you showed up with a mask at their church during COVID, they would kind of like look at you and go, "What are you doing here with a mask on?"
Oh, wow.
And but very played on, got a lot of new people because
I see.
the first weeks of COVID,
Right.
there were people that were like, I'm not rolling with the whole no church. I'm going to church, and I'll leave my church. We were at a hotel.
Yeah.
So
We were at the school.
we were at a school,
Yeah.
and there was a Calvary guy. I'm not going to say who his name is, but I will in about 2 minutes. But no, I remember a video went around of him with his Bible, and he was saying, "We're opening our churches on, the Sunday Pentecost, and if you don't open your church that day, then you're not a church." Basically that was kind of the mentality.
Totally.
And I was like, wait a second, you have a building,
Right.
You have keys to it, you can unlock it,
Right.
You can go into it. I'm at a hotel. They're not going to let us meet inside.
Right.
You were at a school. They're not going to let you meet there.
Same happened to us. It's like the storm of people online, like, open your doors. And I'm like, what doors?
Yeah.
We don't have any doors. We never had any doors. You
Yeah.
know, like we got a landlord that told just close their doors. And it was a wild season, man. And
So I saw people in our own church that had been at our church for 30 plus years leave and go to this squirrely, doctrinally way off church.
No.
Because they were meeting.
Wow.
And so anyway, my daughter had a friend that was going to this church, and they put one right behind her house. Dad, they were blah, 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 my friend wants me to come to their youth group. And I was like, okay. And I'm like wrestling with it. And she's like, Dad, you hate so many churches. She said that. I was like, well, let me explain it to you. I don't hate churches. I'm guarded. I am so guarded.
Yeah. Because you've seen it all.
And I have so many friends that are young guys who I grew up with in the ministry that are pastoring their churches, and it's sadly I won't link arms with them because it's now I don't believe there's a rapture anymore. I don't believe this anymore. There's this whole thing in the church right now, which is so scary. And I see it a lot in worship where it's like, I've got to deconstruct God. Because maybe what I've always grown up thinking isn't right. And I got to deconstruct him and the church and figure out, like,
Right.
is it all what I thought it was?
Right.
Like the last person who should be writing our worship songs is somebody who's deconstructing God.
Right. Right.
God is God. He doesn't need to be deconstructed.
That's right.
But so... Yeah, I think I'm going all over the place, but I think, exposure. I've learned through that whole trying to, because I try to as much as I can, but it's just the more I can expose them, the better. And that's hard too, because kids get busy. Mm-hmm. They do. Like some kids are busier than some adults, and you're just like, okay, you got this and that, and you got this finals, you got sports, you got this, you got, and trying to keep them plugged in. My oldest, when our kids basically turned 18, it was no longer a, hey, you're going to church. It was like, hey, I'd love you to go to church with us. And sadly, my son works on Sundays, but who's at home. But if it's a Sunday, he's not working, he's not at church.
Yeah.
And it bums me out.
Yeah.
I'm bummed that he's not wanting to go to church.
Yeah.
And, but I get it. He's, 19 years old, and works a full-time job, and he's tired.
Yeah.
And he's like, I want to sleep in, Dad. And I'm like, all right, my prayer is that you'll show up.
Yes.
You'll be here one day.
It's awesome.
So, and then there's my daughter who's, close to 17. Well, why she comes and she's willingly coming, but then there's, why do I have to go? And he doesn't.
Sure.
You'll have your choice.
Right.
You'll have your choice. But
yeah, my dad did something similar for us. I don't remember when it was around 14 or 15 or something. Like I don't know, like if we were just like being lazy and just wanted to stay home and sleep in or whatever, he would just let us. My dad was a worship leader in the church. I was kind of shocked by that. I think, like, reflecting back on it, because of course we always went to church together. We always did that, but he wasn't heavy-handed about it. He loved us through it, and he just kept pouring. And that, you keep pointing this out, like, Phil, it's kind of like this, the expectations from the church on pastors and their kids, or families and their pastor and their families, and then the internal expectation of the father and or mother on the kids. And I think that's really interesting to analyze and unpack, because I think the pastor can take that on as well, where he thinks that there are these expectations upon me, and then thus I must live up to them. And then he starts to try to do that, and starts to fake his kids out, thinking that, and himself out, thinking that he can actually do it. And then gives off a persona, sons, daughters, I am perfect, and you should be perfect like me. And then they attempt to do it, and it doesn't work out, and they get smashed in the process, or dad ends up falling greatly in the process, and then the whole thing falls apart. And I love, I think what cracks through, what I'm hearing, kind of cracks through all of this and really gets to the heart of the issue is just being honest and real and genuine with your kids right where they're at, inside the home. They see you broken. They see you do something wrong, say, I'm sorry. They see you struggle, see you pray. And like you had said earlier, I think you were talking about the experiences you're having with your dad, that he was hoping that you would catch it, that you would see the real in him, the real thing that, and man, I want that. I think more than ever before. I think at the end of life, I would love for each of my kids to declare, my dad's not perfect, made a lot of mistakes, did a lot of stupid stuff, but I think he loves God. I think he really loves God, and I know he loves me. And if I could figure that one out, then at the end of the day, I think they'll find the Lord. Like, I think they will eventually find him, because why do kids run from the church? They think it's fake. They think it's, it's like, what are we doing this for? This is just some, and until they experience it,
Right. Yeah.
in real time, like the missions trips and the wilderness experience, and like, when, they need God to show up in real time. And when that happens, the lights turn on, and that's, what happened for each of us. I watched my dad all those years, through all the hardship, through all the pain, through all the stuff. He just kept singing. Me and my brother concluded my dad's two best friends are music and Jesus. Like, that's kind of, he didn't really have a lot of friends, but he'd always held to those things. And we just watched him through all the seasons kind of cling to that, cling to the Lord, cling to music. And it impacted us deeply. And my dad would say he's a terrible dad, like he didn't raise us right, or, he didn't provide enough, or he didn't, he just going to tear himself down, say he didn't do a good job. And me and my brother's like, he did a great job. We had a great dad, we're thankful, it was difficult, but man, we're thankful. He just kept pressing. So I'm kind of hoping for that, instead of the other, where it's like, I create this, crystal cathedral, like in the home, we're going to be this, and I am this, thus you must be this. And if you don't, you failed me, and the church doesn't approve of you. And, dad cares more about the church than he does the kid, the family and mom. And like, I ask a lot of these questions, or like listening to a lot of this, Phil, because I'm in it right now. And like, I'm asking for me,
Yeah.
And
I'll tell you that realness is so I won't get into too much detail. I talk about my kids,
Yeah, it's good.
I do, but at the same time, I need to be, I'm always careful, but
Yes.
I'll share this there as far as just that realness, even within the church. My oldest son, at one point, we had something going down which was super hard for me, being a police chaplain, to have to call the police on my own son.
Yeah.
So I call the police, and there, if you're familiar with law enforcement, which is pretty awesome now, most police departments have what's called PERT. So it's like a counselor therapist that will ride along with cops.
Sure.
And I'm like, hey, is there any way, this is what's going down, could you, because the thing is, I don't want, I'm sitting here going, I don't want cops to come in, I don't want my son to get in an altercation with cops.
Yes.
So could you bring somebody, that can, somebody with PERT come? Well, that'll be 30 minutes or like that. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess we'll wait. So we have we call them core groups in our church, which are home groups. And I was reading a book, this was a few years back, by Paul Tripp, called Dangerous Calling. If you're a pastor, I'd encourage you to read it. One of the things he stresses in there that is, every pastor should be teachable. Every pastor should be attending regularly a study where they're taught. And I was like, you know what? We don't have a home group in this where we live in South Bay. let's start one in our house, and I'm going to have somebody else teach it. And so we've had that going for like 15 years now.
Wow.
And so there was a couple coming, both cops in the community we work in. So, I have to call the police and, starting to think about what are my neighbors going to think when the cops show up, blah, blah, blah. And I get a text, and sure enough, it's from one of the cops that goes to our home group from our church, and she says, "We're on our way." I was like, oh, they're on duty tonight. I'm like, wow. Oh, man.
Right.
And I just started like, Lord, I don't want them to be a part of this. And he's like, these are the very people you want to be a part of this.
Wow, praise God.
This is the body of Christ. Why wouldn't you want the body of Christ to be a part of this? And if she wouldn't have been there, like he would have not, I don't think, received the compassion and care and of how everyone treated him and that moment, God kind of just said, you know what, you don't need to go and preach about everything in your life, but the body of Christ needs to be present at times, and you need not to be afraid of them seeing it and being there. So, like in our home group, if there's something that's going on in our home, we share it with our home group because it's like, hey, you're in our home.
Right.
You're going to eventually notice something's not right. Something's not jiving. Or where did he go?
Right.
Why haven't we seen him in a couple of weeks?
Right.
Or and we tell him, hey, this is what's going on. We're not going to give you a ton of details, but we want you guys to be in the loop because if we're truly doing life together, like I've got to let you know what's going on in my life. And I think that breaks down that whole,
yes,
and there's a flip, there's, and again, everyone's called the different things. I remember I was sharing with another pastor that we have a home group. What? I would never expose my kids to letting people from the church come and meet in our home.
Right.
Like I'm protecting them.
Right.
Oh, okay, I got it. So everyone's different. Sure. Everybody's called to something different. But I tell people all the time when they leave our church, I make it sound like people leave all the time. They do. I'm a horrible preacher. No. But I will tell them this, and usually they'll say where they're going, and I'll let them know right off the bat what you're doing right here. You sitting down and talking with me. I'm nobody special, but that will never happen at the church you're going to.
Right.
Because where you're going to, there's not a pastor there. There's a personality, a speaker, a teacher.
Right.
And if you ask to meet with that person, you'll most likely be funneled to fifth down the line.
Right.
And I will encourage people, if you're going to leave here, go to a Bible teaching, Bible believing, Holy Spirit filled church. But go to a church that has a shepherd, that will, and they may be busy, that's okay, but you can go to after service and say hello to, shake their hand, talk to them, they can pray for you.
Yes.
There might be times where they're, again, busy and they're not available, but you want to be at least able to say,
yes, I'm
new here, and I would just like to meet you and plug in, and, and to me, there's something scary or something's off when we put ourselves in the position of shepherd, but then well, there's other guys that will do that.
Right.
I'm doing this.
Right.
Okay, then just call yourself a teacher.
Right.
Not a shepherd.
Right.
Or I'm going to say this or step down from that and let somebody else shepherd and go out and do your speaking in what you do. But so I think it's so crucial that they see that
the shepherd should smell like sheep.
Yeah. Totally. What was it? When we do our intimacy class for premarital, I'll always go into Song of Solomon, which I tell couples, you're not allowed to read this together until after you're married. But what is he? He's looking at the Shulamite, their wedding night, and he's looking at her, and he is going through her teeth, looking at her teeth to her neck, and then he says, your hair is like the hair of the goats of Gilead. He says, right? So we should smell like the goats of Gilead. But I always remind couples, like, he was not saying you smell like a goat.
Right.
To his new wife.
Right.
He was actually saying your hair is like silk.
Right.
But you're right. We should have some hay stuck in our fur.
Yeah.
We should be smelly.
Yeah. We need to be with the people, and we should hopefully be able to keep our our finger on the pulse of the church and have an idea of where the church is at, and what is going on. And it's easy to create that distance. It's easy to isolate, because of all the turmoil and all the things it's messy. People are messy. Sheep are messy, know.
Yeah.
You got to get in the mud, and but I love this idea. We were talking about it yesterday, but it's, Jesus is the only one who got to choose his disciples. Like we don't get to choose our disciples. They just show up.
Yep.
You're like, Lord, these are my guys. You're like, these are my guys. And this is who I got to pour my life into. And that's hard to process, but that's the truth of ministry. We've been doing the church just 9 years now here in LA, and but even all the years at Harvest, the common denominator is that people are people. Man, they are not. They are changing. They are working through the sanctification process, but it's ironic that I want them to be something different and grow a lot faster than oftentimes they do, because I didn't grow that fast. My plant took a lot of pruning, a lot of fertilizing, a lot of growing. I have had many shepherds, who've sat me down and corrected me and encouraged me. And gosh, it's taken me so long, and I'm still like so far behind. It's weird how you grow older, and even in ministry, you're just like, God, what's wrong with me? Like, why can I still not figure this out? Like what's the problem here? But may I give the same compassion, to these people as God gives to me and as other men have given to me. So Phil, you had the unique opportunity. You were one of the first in Calvary Chapel to go through this succession, this passing of the baton. And I don't know whether you realize it or not, being in it, it's like, from the outside looking in, I'm just like, this kind of hasn't happened like in Calvary Chapel, and it's starting to happen more, but it is this last 10 years has kind of been the decade where it first began. I don't even know which Calvary Chapel was the first to do it, but we haven't had many amazing examples in our non-denomination denomination. Some other denominations maybe have been doing it for a couple hundred years or so, and they have some pictures, they have some good transitions, good succession plans. Others, terrible, didn't work out. But nevertheless, they have case studies. They can look at things and see it. You had the unique opportunity of being able to do this and step into it. And I'd love to hear, kind of your perspective on it. You took over the church, and you went from son of the pastor to the lead pastor. And you're doing it.
I changed my titles to senior global. No, just kidding.
Yeah,
senior global pastor.
Boom, boom! I love it. Hey, let's go.
Head janitor. That's what my business card says. I don't have a business card. But that's what it says. You're right. Calvary. I'm just going to say it because I think it's important.
You can say it, Phil.
Yeah, Calvary does not have any example.
Yeah,
Calvaries do not. Chuck passed and Chuck did not. And the reality is that Chuck never really ever handed the church over to Brian, who runs it now.
Sure.
And there was never hey, he's taken over.
You're stating a reality of someone who grew up in the movement and fully understands what happened behind the scenes. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think even people there in the church knew that, okay,
sure.
This is...
It was a public thing.
It naturally happened, and that's who was there. You're right. There's so many churches that have gone through it, have done it. And when we first started talking about it, for me, it was... it is people think it's an easy process. It is a very difficult process. Transitioning is a hard thing. It's harder for people like my dad who are founding pastors who started their church.
Right.
It's easier when you're a pastor who's rolled in from church before that you were at for 10 years. Now you took this church over. Now you're raising somebody up.
Yeah.
It's hard when you've seen this. God bring this church from inception to grow it to what it is, so it's difficult. And I think the enemy would love. I know this wholeheartedly. The enemy would love for pastors just to die at the pulpit, and I think some are called to do that. I do believe that some are called to do that.
Sure.
But is it right? Is it right for a church to have to go through that? And I think it again is kind of that fear of well, I'm afraid to go into this and step out into this, but I believe it's 100% biblical. And we started, my dad at one point started, and he had other guys that were around that that people probably assumed, well, that would be the guy who would take over, you know, and for me, it was interesting. I'm going to share this real quick because I think it kind of helps where we were at. But we took over years ago. Our church took over a small little church that was about 10 minutes west of us. And it started out as a small Swedish Baptist church.
Okay.
It was closed. They weren't meeting on Sundays. They met for prayer. They had a preschool going. The original 15 people were still there. I think it was started in the 60s. And they came and said, if you will give us a pastor, we'll give you our church, we'll give you our property. It's yours. So, and it's in a really cool part of town of San Diego. So my dad started going over there and would drive, from our campus over to there, would teach, would go back, teach the second service at our campus, and immediately 300-400 people were. It's a small little chapel.
Wow.
300 people were packed in there because he was there. So after about 6 months, he's like, "All right, I'm going to set guys up on rotation, 4 weeks at a time. They'll go over. They'll do 4 weeks." And it went down to 100. After he stopped being there, but 100 for these 15 was So I was over on our rotation and on one of the rotations, and I just felt like the Lord say, these people don't have a pastor. They don't know what it is to be the church. They know how to do church, but they don't know how to be the church. And I really prayed with my wife, and I think we need to stay here. And I went to my dad and just said, "Hey, I feel like we need to stay here. They need a pastor. They need to know what ministry is. I want them to experience more than just Sunday morning."
Yes.
And we stayed ended up being 5 years there. And I tell people this, usually 5 years, I don't know if you experienced this, but 5 years there for us was the thing started to click.
Yes.
Okay, we got a worship team.
Right.
There were times where it's for the first 3 years, Sunday morning, I'd be on the phone.
Right.
"Hey, I still haven't found a worship leader. Can you come and do what, or
Totally.
5-year mark, it was okay, we got a guy doing youth. We got a worship guy. We it's clicking, know, and I went on a trip to South Korea to do a youth crusade, and while I was gone, there was, and through the years, there's been different guys that have come onto our church staff from different ministries and that would help at seasons and different things. But while I was gone, one of these guys had, I guess, when I returned from this trip, I went back and the preschool chef who was at the preschool at the church we were at, coolest guy. I loved his food he'd make, but he came to me and in his broken English, he's telling me that there was men in suits walking around the church while I was gone, and immediately I knew real estate guys, So come to find out, while I was on this trip in South Korea, they sold the church.
No.
Yeah. So for me, I was like, okay, it'd been nice to be in the loop to know.
Right.
So these, 100 or so people that were coming, I just had to let them know that, hey, and they sold it to another church. Another church, was coming to take it over. And
wow.
And I was kind of devastated. I was just bummed that I wasn't in the loop, didn't know, was blindsided.
Yeah. Why wouldn't they sell it to you?
Right. Well, it was ours. It was Horizon's church.
So you're saying Horizon sold it?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Well, a particular person who was on our staff at the time pushed for this.
I see.
And I look back and I think ultimately this guy kind of wanted to push me out as well.
I see.
But anyway, so I was kind of really after that praying through, okay, Lord, my options are to go and start a church on my own somewhere, because I was under our church, under Horizon, being sent out kind of to pastor this, but then I would go back and be at other campus during the week and different stuff. And And at that time, there was I would say 8 people on our staff that were, and we were a bigger church at the time, that were in admin roles, pastorally, ministerially, administration roles. And I looked and said, God, I'm not needed over there. So if I'm supposed to go back, you're going to have to move people. And literally, one by one, over a 2-year process, one person, I think I'm supposed to go.
Wow.
I'm supposed to go.
Wow.
And then we started, the conversation started happening of transition. And so very interesting. I was at a dinner in D.C. And at the Supreme Court. They hosted this dinner, and there was pastors there, and I'm sitting next to a guy. I have no idea who he is. He's talking to me, and he says, "Who are you?" And I said, "Oh, from San Diego, blah, blah, blah. I pastor with my dad." He goes, "Are you going to take over the church?" I said, "I don't know. We've talked about it." And he just looks at me and he goes, "If there's not a plan, it's never going to happen." And I said, "Okay." And he goes, I went through the same thing with my dad. And there wasn't a plan. And so I'm at a different church now. So anyway, a year goes by. I don't remember the guy's name. Don't remember what church he was with. So I call this ministry who set up this dinner, and I'm like, "Hey, I was sitting at a table. There was this big guy, football player guy from, I don't know where he was from." And she's like, "Well, let me see if I can look back. That was a while ago." She's like, "Okay, I think I found who it is." So I call the guy, and I'm like, "Hey, listen, I was sitting next to you." He goes, "I remember you." I said, "Is there any way I can fly out and just sit down with you and talk to you about transition?"
Wow.
And I went out, and he brought his staff in. He went through the whole. So what happened was he was pastoring with his dad, and his dad's best friend, who was pastoring another church, was praying for someone to take over his church. And the Lord put his best friend's son on his heart, this guy. So he calls his dad. He said, I've been praying, and I feel like your son is the one who's supposed to take over our church.
Wow.
And the dad was like, "Well, I was planning on having him eventually take over here, but as well, if you feel like the Lord is, you can meet with him." So he met with him, they prayed, and this founding pastor of this church put together this plan that was, I think, so biblical, so right. The best picture I've seen of transition.
Wow.
And not a Calvary. But he, from day one, he sat down. I'm going to bring you on staff. We're going to go a year, see how things are. But he laid out a calendar, and he said, "But at this point, this date is when you'll take over the staff." And then he said, "And this date right here, year 2, is the Sunday that I will pass the baton to you." Literally that meeting, he put it on the calendar.
Wow.
And going forward, this founding pastor, everything he did, and the way he explained it, I thought it was kind of a, cool analogy, but was like, he said he looked at it as the game of golf, and he said, "I'm getting the tee ready for you to put the ball on, for you to hit it."
It's good.
And he went, and this was a kind of a traditional church. You walked in, big stage, Roman pillars, choir of 100 people.
Wow.
This founding pastor went before even announcing transition and started changing everything.
Wow.
So that the new guy wouldn't be the guy to change everything.
Wow.
Because there's nothing worse than I'm the new guy and I'm going to change everything,
yeah. Wow.
Which things sometimes don't need to be changed.
Sure.
But he went and he remodeled the sanctuary. He got rid of the huge choir every Sunday.
Wow.
He got more contemporary worship.
Amazing.
He, painted that. What color do you want we'll paint it that. And
wow.
And every point was to, okay, I want to get, so when you take over, this is seamless. It's ready to go. And that Sunday, it went according to their schedule. That Sunday of Transition Sunday, he handed him a baton. And I thought it was so cool. Then he handed every single person in the church, they handed him a baton.
Wow. And
said, "It's not just him, but it's all of you that are going forward."
That's good.
And I love the relationship they continued. He, was like pastor emeritus. And he basically, the new pastor said, "Listen, anytime you're traveling, you're speaking, you see a need, you're in another country, whatever you want to commit, we'll as a church back it. If you feel like our church, you see a need over in Africa, or you're there, if you say 20 grand, if you say 5 grand, we'll back back that. And it was just this beautiful picture of setting it up for, and I don't want to use the word success, but very intentional.
Yeah, trying to.
Yeah.
Help as best you can.
So after hearing that, I was like, I tried not to ever bring it up. It was something that I felt like, okay, if you really feel that I'm the one, then this is yours. You need to put it in motion.
Right.
You know? But we did. We got to that place where we said, okay, we got to have a plan. And we immediately put that plan in writing, and then we announced it to the church, and then we put it on our website so that everybody could go and kind of see the timeline of, okay, at this point, he'll be doing 3 Sundays. At this point, you know, what it will look like.
Yeah.
And for me, it helped me because I know, again, for a lot of guys, it's a struggle. Like, I've seen transitions where the guy's like, okay, we're going to do it in a year. 5 years later, the guy's still waiting around going,
Right.
I thought we were doing this in a year.
Right.
You know? So, and then you feel like the person who's transitioning into the position, you feel like I'm being a jerk and I'm pushing somebody out, or I'm, so I think that open lines of communication are huge. But you are so right. In Calvary's, there's not a good example. I think we're maybe one of now maybe 6 or maybe under 10 that have done it. And you're right. It's becoming more and more common.
Yes.
I was just at the last Calvary Pastors Conference, and they now, the group that kind of oversees the Calvary Association or group of Calvaries,
Sure.
they brought up 4 new guys that they're, going to step in and help oversee that.
Awesome.
And I thought that was great, but it also was done in such a quick way that it was like, and here's one thing, if you are at the age, this is one thing I would discourage you. I hear a lot of these old guys say, I know we're dying, and you guys want younger people, and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, that's not what we want.
Right.
We don't want that. Like, I don't like going to pastors' conferences and everybody being over 40 teaching, under 40. But I also don't like going to a pastor conference and everybody's over 75 who's teaching.
Yeah.
Like, there needs to be this healthy balance.
Yes.
And I think that is I tell our church all the time, we need to really pray about being a church when we see more walkers in our lobby than strollers. So if there's more walkers than strollers, we're in trouble. So, but if there's also all strollers and no walkers, we're in trouble.
That's true.
So these new churches today, they ploy on like advertising of all young people, young pastor, young. Okay, where's the roots? Where's the solid foundation? Where's guys that have been in the Bible for 30 years? Where's so that balance is so key.
Yes.
But yeah, so we went through, that period, and I'll tell you this, it was such a humbling for me, super humbling, because over the years I saw close friends or young families leave our church, and I began to think, oh, they'll come back as soon as I take over. Nope. I'm like, where are they? They haven't come back.
Wow.
And I'm like, oh, well, then God's like, they've been plugged into another church for 4 years. They're not coming back.
Wow.
So God uses it for me, it was one of the most humbling stripping processes. And then for me, you throw in the mix that it's with your dad. Right. Which is a whole nother, and again, my dad's not perfect. I love him. He's awesome. He's set an amazing example. But I remember we had a guy on staff once said, oh, you got it so easy, here working and your dad being your boss and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yeah, I said, the difference, though, is if my dad has a barbecue at the house and we all go over there, you go over there, he's not your dad. I go over there, I'm work here, and he's my dad. Right. I'm like, there's two, so yeah, you may think it's easier, but it's family. Right. It's tough. It's hard.
Right. It never turns off.
It never turns off. So, and I will say this, I am so proud of my dad for faithfully walking through it. Yes. And I know. So you did 40 years of ministry, huh? Yeah. It's amazing. Yep. 4 decades. And I'm blown away. He comes to church when he's in town. He comes on Sundays. Him and my mom come, and he takes notes. He will text me after the service and tell me what I did wrong. No, he's never actually never said anything that I've done wrong. And usually it's always like, hey, I never saw that before. Wow. I never, and it's like.
How did he have the foresight to do this? I mean, I mean, in Calvary years, I mean, he's kind of done it on the younger side of himself,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that, I mean, that's visionary to be able to do that, to hand things off when things are in a good place, and not hand things off when, everything seems to be kind of like
Yeah.
completely dumping.
I think it was just the movement of the Lord.
Yeah.
And there were things that were not in good places. Like
Sure.
we in the midst of transition, we were on our campus. We were on for almost 36 years. Mm-hmm. We were in the midst of losing that. Mm-hmm. We had debt that we've never had before. Mm-hmm. Crazy scenario where we leased for almost 30 years. They came to us and basically said, "Hey, we're going to turn this into a performing arts school. You guys got to leave." So we went and we bought a property for our schools, bought a property for our church, thinking we had to leave. They came back 6 months later. We changed our minds. You can stay. And we're like, well, the best thing would be to stay, but we bought these. So we were stuck with one of those properties for about 10 years.
Wow.
And we, then at that point, 30-something-year-old campus, we started to remodel it. So even in that, there was some debt, there were some things going on where I know my dad was like, I don't want to hand this over to you with this. I want to take care of it first. Mm-hmm. And I remember telling my dad, that's not for you to, God doesn't want you to have to carry that anymore.
Wow.
He wants somebody else to carry it. And he wants me to have to go through it to do that. And it was supernatural. We got out of debt we were in, and I mean, it was crazy how God worked. And any transition, people left. People left because, I had people come to me day one. Your dad will always be my pastor.
Wow, come on, man.
And I love you, but he'll always be my pastor. And I would look at him and go, I get it. I get it, but maybe you've also put, again, somebody in a position they shouldn't be in.
Yeah, what are the, I guess 2 questions, what are the most difficult things that the person stepping into that position takes on you?
Yeah.
What were the most difficult thing? What's the most difficult things of the one passing the baton, what that he has to work through as well?
Okay.
So kind of those 2 different perspectives from what you can see.
I think for the one passing the baton, I think because it is a biblical right thing, I think the enemy works overtime in both, for both of the one passing it on, the one receiving.
Yeah.
And I think the enemy can play in mind games of, oh, this is a failure. No, this is biblically right.
Mm-hmm.
Or
this is the right thing to do.
This is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And when we have the pulpit, like, it's just such a reminder. I remember that church we took over, the little church we took over. I've never done this ever since, but there was a guy at that church who was one of the original guys who would play the piano, but he would play the piano before church would start. Mm-hmm. Be up there playing the piano and kind of like the walk-in music, and super cool guy. And I don't know why I did this, but I walked up to him after one Sunday and I said, "Hey, how do you think I did?" Mm-hmm. And ever since then, I've learned, don't ever go up to somebody and say, "How do you think I taught today?"
Right.
And he shared a word that I'd never heard at that point. He said, "You were meddling." I said, "Meddling." I go home, I get the dictionary out. What was I doing? I'm like, meddling. He goes, "You were talking about stuff you didn't really need to even talk about. Like, you didn't need to talk about any of that." And I haven't done this, and I need to, but I've always wanted to make a plaque that goes on the pulpit, because there's times where I'll find myself, why did I need to even talk about that? But when we have the pulpit for that, when you have that pulpit, it's hard to let go of that.
Yes.
It's hard to not have the routine of every Sunday.
Yeah. It's essentially your baby, right?
It's what you've done.
Yeah.
It is difficult. And I think it's just like, it's obviously not a job, it's a calling. But I think we can compare it to an athlete that has to retire from. I mean, you think of Michael Jordan having to retire from basketball. What was that like? Just to say, I'm not going to show up anymore.
I don't get to play anymore. Yeah.
And then what did he do? Well, now I'm going to become a baseball player.
Right.
Now I'm going to become a golfer.
Right,
now I'm going to. It's like, and I feel like the enemy makes us think that it's not a good thing. Oh, now I got to rediscover myself. We're
not useful anymore or something.
We're not useful anymore.
Wow.
And I think that, I look at my dad and I think now that we're seeing what we're seeing, there are so many more people now going to him saying, what do I do? Like I'm at the point where I know it's time for me to transition.
Right.
What do I do?
Wow.
And I would love to throw this out there. If you're a pastor, and you're, in the position of wanting to transition, or you're in the process of it. I know there's companies out there that do church consultations.
Sure.
They come along and which do that for money. But if there's someone listening that you're in that process and you're like, what do we do? What works? What doesn't work? If we can be a sounding board, I mean, I would, in a drop of a pin or hat, whatever you want to say, I would fly out. Love to be able to encourage you guys at no cost and just say, here's what we did, and maybe it'd help you guys, maybe it wouldn't, but I think there's things that I've seen, experienced through ours, and things that I've seen at others where it's like that could, if you avoided that, it could save. And it's got to be led by the Holy Spirit, obviously.
Yes.
It's just like any other. We can bring a program in and steps but if the Holy Spirit's not leading it, then the people are going to see that. They're going to know that this isn't of the Lord.
Right.
And I truly believe that people will. And one thing my dad always brings back, because he had probably three other guys that approached him like, hey, it's time. I should be the guy to take over.
Wow.
And had plans ready to go. Like I remember one guy came and had a binder full of, here's the steps. I'll do this long, then Phillip will take over after me, and blah 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 blah. And I think the one thing my dad will always remind me of is the one thing that I knew about. He will tell me, and he'll say this today, is that I knew for you, anytime you talked about the church, it wasn't ever about what you wanted to do, or it was always about the people. And he's like, I knew that you loved the people, where these other guys had plans of, here's what I want to do for me. So it's something that I think we're hitting a crossroads where it's got to happen. It's got to happen, and it's got to happen in the biblical right way. And I think support is huge. And I know we didn't do it perfectly. There's,
Sure.
Our board was kind of at one point not ready, because we kind of dropped it on our board, like boom, and the board was like, what? And I think they immediately thought like it was immediate. I was like, no, this is going to be a year process. Here's what it's going to look like. And we had, again, a lot of things going on in the midst of our trenches. The property was a huge thing.
Right.
I was fighting for us because they told us at one point they were going to take it back. Then they told us we could keep it. Then they came to us at one point and said, we know you've always wanted to own it. This would be the time to make us an offer. So we went and made an offer, went through the whole process of trying to buy it. They ended up, like a week at the end of our negotiation period, they ended up turning around and selling it to another school.
Wow.
Yeah. So I think
Classic.
they used us to open the door to be able to sell it.
Of course.
And so this other school bought it, and we had our lease left. So they had 9 years stuck with us. So I just was like, Lord, I just started, I would go down once a month to meet with the school, their board. You guys made a mistake. Let us stay. Sell it to us. And they got to the point where they were super courteous and nice. And they got to the point where one meeting, he just looked at me and said, we're never going to sell it to you. Stop coming and meeting with us. Wow. And I fought and fought and fought. And I remember I was sitting with our board, and this was before this was the midst during the transition. They came to us and said, listen, we'll buy you out of your lease. We'll buy you out, so you guys go find another place and we can get this sooner.
Wow.
Because they didn't want to wait the 9 years.
Wow.
In my mind, I'm thinking, they don't want to wait the 9 years, so let's just make them wait it out.
Right.
And at some point they're going to say, okay, we'll sell it to you.
Right.
And I remember sitting with our board, and again, this was during transition, and I said, listen, I know you all have a decision to make as far as, do we leave here early or do we stay? And I just challenged our board. I said, if you are not going to be here after this transition happens, then I would I just beg you not to vote. Because what right do you have to vote for the future if you're not going to be with us in the future?
Right.
And the reality is, out of that board of 12 people, one of them is still around.
Wow.
Yeah. So, you know,
So
God,
that was a surprise, huh?
That was a surprise, you
Yeah.
know. And I love each and every one of them.
Yes.
You know, and they were called for a season
Wow, Phil.
to what God was doing through my dad. So, and that's the other thing. It opens up, and that's the thing where I think when you even think about transition, it then opens your mind up to say, okay, let's look at all of ministry and say, why do we still do this? Well, because we've always done it. Do we need to still do that?
Right.
You know, do we need to? And it opened up, I think, for us as a ministry, so many new opportunities to say, okay, let's not. We're never going to leave the foundations of what we stand upon. But do we need to do that? No. Do we need to? You know, and for me, even after the transition of being there, still 2 years on that property, I really felt like God was going to give it to us, and He didn't. And so that was a whole stripping for me, and it was a really good thing. You know, I know I'm going along, but this one last story is
good.
This was before losing property, even knowing about the property. When we had our schools going, there was a guy a neighbor who called and left a voicemail at the church late at night. And didn't leave his name, didn't leave his number, but he said, you know, I hear those kids every day on the field, and they're loud and they're obnoxious. And he said, if you don't do something about it, I'm going to be, and it's going to be on the 11 o'clock news.
Oh,
you know,
come on.
and then he leaves. You know, so the school, the principal, everybody at our school is freaking out. He's going to, come and shoot our kids. What is he going to do?
Right.
So I got on one of our golf carts and I cruised off the school and just started driving down the neighborhood. And I just threw up a quick prayer and I'm like, Lord, if you want me to find this guy, let him be outside.
Yes.
Let me see him.
Yes.
So I get 4 houses down and here's this dude working on his boat in his front yard. And God was like, there he is.
Whoa.
So I go over and I was like, hey, my name's Phillip. I'm from the church right across the street. And he goes, oh yeah, those kids I called and left a message. I said, wait a second. I just need to know right now, do I need to call the police? He's like, well, why? I said, because you said you were going to do something to kids that would be on the news. He goes, oh, I just said that to get you guys to do something. And I spent an hour talking to this guy, Vietnam vet, kind of all over the place. And at the end of our conversation, it ended with, hey, I just invited him. I said, why don't you come to church on Sunday? He said, maybe I will. This is the first time I've lived here for 20 years. First time anybody's ever invited me.
Wow.
And I got back in our golf cart and I just started weeping. And I realized that was the first time I'd ever gone to a home right next door to our church.
Wow.
And we'd been there for 30 something years.
Wow.
And other people I'm sure, have, but we were the church that, oh great, your cars are parked in front of our driveway on Sundays. And when we did it, our church, over the years, we would send, teams all over the world, outreach here, outreach there. And when we lost our property and when we had to move, God said, the first thing He said is, your goal is to love this community like no one ever has. And eventually I will give you back the world, to love. But you've got to first start here.
That's good.
And we did things different. We would do every year on our big campus, we would do every Thanksgiving, we would bus in about 800 homeless people.
Wow.
We would feed them. Our gymnasium turned into like a Kohl's. They would walk in and be able to get clothes off of racks.
Wow.
They would get pedicures, manicures, feet washing station.
Wow.
Job resumes, legal assistance. There was a dentist who would literally clean teeth, and then he would hop in a car with him and take him to his office and do full-on extractions. And it was huge, thousands of people. So, we lose our property, we lose our schools, and that was a big one for us. When we lost our schools, we lost a lot of people in our church that came because of the school.
Sure.
And here we are at our building, which we called Base Camp, and it's Thanksgiving. We're like, well, we don't have school buses anymore. We now have church vans. We could go get homeless people. We could try to do what we did before. God was like, no, that building right next to you that has 70 people living in it, you invite them over for Thanksgiving.
Wow.
And give them a turkey and have a barbecue. And so we did, we just went door to door and said, hey, next Sunday, we're gonna give away just Costco turkeys, Costco pies, and have a little barbecue if you guys want to come and grab a turkey for Thanksgiving. So like 30 people showed up. We sat down. We were just sitting with these people. And then this year we just did it, and we did 600 turkeys, 600 pies.
Oh my gosh.
So, which was so cool.
Yes.
And we do a drive-through. So where they drive through.
Oh, I love it.
And it's cool because these are all things that it's like we don't usually have the money to do it.
Sure.
I mean, last year there was a turkey shortage.
Yeah.
So yeah, 600 turkeys, 600 pies comes out to about like $14,000. It's not cheap.
Wow.
I remember the first year of ringing up at Costco, there was a guy in line behind me. He's like, "You just spent $8,000 on turkeys?" I'm like, "Yeah." First year we did it though. This is what's crazy. The first year we did it, put it on credit card, which I'm not a big fan of credit cards, but you become resourceful, right? So we were meeting at a hotel for 5 years.
Wow.
So we got a credit card that was for that chain of hotels. So we pay for our rentals, get double the points.
Nice.
Get free hotels whenever we travel or do whatever.
Wow.
So anyway, like, Lord, how are we going to pay for this? Driving literally back from Costco the first year of getting I think that year was 400. And a guy I see leaving our base camp, our building. And I walked in, and he had already gotten in his car and drove off. And the gal who does our accounting, she's like, "Hey, he just dropped off this check," and it was literally exactly for what we just left Costco buying, and it was like every time. So we have relearned how to do, and some people question what we do because what we've done, everything we do is out of the box now.
I love it, Phil. I love it.
So,
I mean, we've learned so much. I mean, just hearing the stories and things you guys do, and I love it. It's like your dad did it one way, and now Phil is going after what he feels God calling him to do, and it's a different way of ministry than I mean, I'll never forget the story of you guys. You got the fire chief and like the police chief or something to go over to the gas station and pump gas with you, and for the next 100 cars, they're going to get a full tank of gas, or you did something, or you had a certain allotted amount, and you're like, we're just going to burn up this money on filling up people's tanks and just do it in the name of Jesus. And like these really unique ways of trying to bring people together and love people in the name of Jesus in a really tangible, practical way. And as I said in the intro, like this boots on the ground, like I'm going to touch these people, in the name of Jesus, and believe that God's going to use this. And you have these inventive ways of doing so, and you're like taking risks, going for it. And it's awe-inspiring, like even from my angle, because it's like I'm in the trenches with you as well. We got this set up tear down, we're in the school, and we're these unique ways of ministering to people is it's difficult because, things are tight, and you're nervous and you would love to, eventually get a building, and you're worrying about, we're going to be able to pay staff, and how much do we save, and how much do we spend on ministry. But you guys, it just seems like you just keep swinging for the fences. You're like, you know what? We're here to minister to this city, to this town, and we're just going to go all in over and over, believing God's going to show up. And 600 turkeys, man, this is like, I mean, right?
I've never eaten turkey again.
It's so awesome. The other thing that was sticking out, though, to me is because you've experienced transition with your dad, you are probably subliminally already thinking that through like it's already a tab in the back of your head, which is not a tab in most pastors' head because you've experienced it.
Totally.
So you're already like, well, probably around this time, I'll probably start thinking about that. And maybe it's a 10-year process. Maybe it's a 5-year process. Maybe it's a 3-year process. I don't know. Maybe it's a 1-year process. But it's like, who is the guy? Lord, when are you going to bring that? How does this, you know what I mean? It's like just to have that hat on, per se. And like believing that is part of the future, that part of my ministry is not only receiving the baton, but it is also passing it on, in the future. And just thinking, I think most pastors don't even think about that stuff. No one plans or projects, no one plans or projects really to retire, what that transition looks like. But it's like, I'm not saying in ministry, I'm just saying in general. Like
Yeah.
people are like, I'm going to retire one day, 401k, 65 and a half, all this is going to go off. And then it's like, it happens and they're like, I don't know what to do for the next 20 years, And I'm going to go move to Hemet, and join the old people golf club, or whatever. They like don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And because no one's really thinking or projecting, but even more so in ministry, like we want the gospel to be generational. We want the legacy of the gospel to go on forever. And we know it will, that God will do it with or without us. But for us to have that in mind and to be thinking about how God might do that in us, I think is a powerful perspective.
Yep. It's huge.
So you guys are, you've been leading Horizon for about 8 years now. Is that right?
Yep.
And, you're plowing the ground there with your wife and your kids getting after it. And, you have been married also through a lot of this ministry, and God, again, by his grace, holds us together and carries us through. We'll even wind this thing down, maybe Phil, in the next, 10, 20 minutes or so, but go get some lunch. But love to hear, any things that have been life-giving, for you and your wife, things that have really blessed you guys over the years, and you look back. How long you guys been married?
Oh, gosh. Good question. 40? No, I'm just kidding. I think we're hitting 22.
Amazing.
Yeah. 22
Amazing.
or 23.
So you got a couple years.
23.
Yeah, you got a couple years under your belt.
Yep.
And Katie and I we're just hit 12 years. Any things that have been life-giving for you guys, that you return back to, you're just like, it's this small thing, it's this big thing we do every year. I don't know, anything that's been a real blessing for you guys.
That's good. I think, and it's interesting too, because I'm kind of weird in the way that I always wanted to be married.
Yeah.
I started saving for a ring when I was 16.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah. So,
yes.
So I had this savings for a wedding ring, and I remember when I met Bethany and started thinking about, proposing, my sister was like, she just told me, she's like, you got to promise me you won't get married until you're 21.
Yeah.
I was like, I can get married whatever I want to. But it was cool because she was, out of all places, she was at Costco.
Yeah.
And she's like, I found the ring.
Huh.
And I was like, at Costco? What am I going to get, a 40-pound bag of dog food and tires and a wedding ring? Engagement ring? But believe it or not, Costco has the best jewelry you can
Do they
find.
really?
Oh, yeah.
And
it's
I bet
crazy.
a good warranty and all that.
Well, because they buy so limited amount that they buy... they buy the best stuff, and it's usually half the price.
Oh.
So I bought this ring, and then I found
tips and tricks, young people.
Yeah.
Tips and tricks.
Had it appraised, and it was like 10 times the value.
Nice. Are you kidding me?
And I lost it. No, I'm just kidding. But so life-giving. It's interesting because even during Christmas, usually we will, for our church, we'll give the staff. Usually it's the week after Christmas. Everybody gets off. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of like part of their like Christmas bonus. They'll get a paid week off, and then they get a Starbucks card for $1.50. But no, I'm just kidding. Like we said to each other the other night, that tonight I think will be the first night in December that we like won't have anything going on. Mm-hmm. So dating, I know, is huge, and but it will always be put off. It will always, and sadly, ministry will always get in the way.
Sure.
And I think it's here's the plus. Not every pastor's wife is called to be in ministry.
That's right.
And I think that's okay.
No, it's good.
I think that's okay.
But there is no pastor's wife position in the New Testament.
Right.
It actually doesn't exist.
Yeah. So I think that's okay. But when they are, there is double the amount of stuff. But there's also the understanding of more of like, okay, I get it. You have a women's event, so we can't do that.
Sure.
Or I've got this going on with the men. Or so I think for us, I think I'm trying to think of when was the first trip that we took together without our kids, and it was definitely we waited way too long. And it's tough.
When you reflect back on the 20 years, you're saying these moments that we've been able to retreat away, even for a day or two, have been super refreshing.
Yeah, I would say it's it's got to be a minimum of 2 days. 1 day is like not enough. If we can get 3 days, awesome. And something happens when something supernatural happens when your kids. This sounds bad. But when your kids are to the point where I'm thinking of a story of we'll do this every once in a while. I don't know, maybe a total of 10 times since we've been married, maybe less. But we'll go get like a manic or a pedicure together. And I have really ugly feet, so I love going and getting.
Do you do the fish and all that stuff? Little fish eating on you? Oh yeah.
No. And then we go do goat yoga right after. But we were sitting at this nail place, and I remember the kids. I think it was the first time we went out and left the kids home alone. Phone rings, and my daughter's panicking because my oldest son has a knife.
No.
And he's hearing noises in the garage.
No.
So he's going into the garage, and I don't know how old he was. I think we left them home alone when I think we felt like 3 was a good age. But I'm on the phone and I'm telling him, coaching him down, like, you got to put the knife, he got a kitchen knife. You got to put the knife down.
Yeah.
Cole, put the knife. And I look over and there's another lady getting her nails and she's just like, listen to the whole conversation, right? And I'm like, we just said, all right, we're coming home. So we were only 5 minutes away.
Right.
So now the first time your kids are old enough where you can leave for a night is like, wow, it's pretty crazy. It's almost like that feeling of when your kid is a baby and the first night that they sleep through the night. Right. You wake up and you're like, what happened?
Right.
What we actually slept through the night. Right. Like, what happened?
Got a full night's sleep, yeah.
So when you can do that, I think it's huge.
Yes.
And here's my thing. I would encourage you, no matter what your budget is, no matter what money looks like, make it a priority to get away. And come up with creative ways if you can't do it. And I will say this: we don't do it enough. But when we do it, it's like, okay, that was good.
Full life-giving, refreshing.
Yeah. So our first trip away, like a real trip, I think was, and my mom took our kids. We were gone for 7 days, and it was
wow.
That was the first one. They were probably all under 10.
Yeah.
And then what's hard is your parents get older.
Yes.
And it's like, my parents could totally probably handle 7 days, but I wouldn't want if my kids were little now, I wouldn't want to put them through that.
Totally.
Like, I'd feel so bad.
Yeah.
So here the thing is too is the seasons, like, grab them when you can. So when you can, like, now I look at it and everyone talks about the whole empty nesting and they sit around going, what do we do? It's like,
go have fun. Yeah.
Like, we had kids young. So I've got a niece.
So you were married how old? You were married?
21.
21.
Yeah.
So you listened to your sister.
So I listened to my sister.
Yeah. And then you guys had kids?
23, right at 23.
23. Okay.
Yeah. So we didn't do the whole, like, hey, let's wait 10 years and travel the world together. Which I have a niece right now that's like in that mindset. We're never going to have kids. And they travel the world. They, at the whim, they will live in, Iceland for 10 months. They'll live over here for a year. They'll go over there. And I'm like, man, I want that. That'd be awesome.
Right.
But when the season comes, I would say, take it.
Yeah,
don't sit around going, what are we going to do?
Right.
Go do it. I think through that too, just being on the same page is huge. Communication is huge. What am I doing? What are you doing? Can save so much turmoil. Just day before yesterday, it was like we had, 10 different things going on, and I was going to, what was I doing? I forgot. Oh, this is cool. We this year with the cops, we have a police station that's right on the same block we're on. So we give them every cop, we give them which was a big stretch, but we give them $100 Amazon gift card, and which usually they don't let us do that, but we sneak it in there to them. But I was delivering those, and then I was like, okay, and then all of a sudden I get a call from my oldest son who's like, wants to come over and can I do laundry? And I was like, and I was being kind of a jerk to him. I'm like, no, you can't go do laundry. Go do laundry at a laundromat. Well, I don't want to do laundry at a laundromat. I'm like, dude, okay, I'll meet you at the laundromat. and I'll get you a cup of coffee, and I'll pay for your load of laundry. We'll hang out and talk. But you need to, I'm telling them, you need to learn how to use a laundromat.
Sure.
Anyway, and then I'm like, okay, I'll come back. We're going to go to the store together, right? We're going to go grocery shopping. So she's at the dentist. She gets home, and she texts me. I'm on my way home. I'm like, okay, cool. At this point, I've totally forgotten that we're supposed to go to the grocery store together, right? And so I get home before her. And as I'm pulling in and I realize she's not home yet, I look and I still have forgotten that we're supposed to go to the grocery store together, and she was going to wait for me to go. And she had to go to work. She works as well, so she had to go to work that night. So I'm pulling into the garage and I look in the back seat and I'm like, oh shoot, there's a package that I'm supposed to take to the post office, and there's 2 checks I'm supposed to go to deposit at the bank. So I back out, I go to the bank, go to the post office, and then she texts, I'm home. And I'm like, cool, all right. And then I said, I'm just hitting the bank and the post office. And then I get the text of like, what? With, question mark, question mark, question mark.
Oh, yeah.
So then I respond with question mark, question mark, question mark.
Oh, no.
Totally oblivious, right?
Right.
So I'm come back home, and she's coming down the street when I'm coming up the street.
Right.
And she's looking at me like, now you're, and I'm like,
Right.
And then it hit me, grocery store.
Right.
So... immediately I text her, I'm so sorry, totally forgot. I had no idea that I was going to have to go teach her son how to use the laundromat.
Right.
I had no idea I was going to go do this. And, so that communication, I think, is so important to keep yourself from those times where you're just like, shoot, we because the enemy at the busy times of life is when he's going to be around to say, let's get frustrated with each other. Let's get angry. Christmas is going to be the time where he's going to even, I was telling our staff last night at our staff party, like I just said, I'm going to be honest with you, I'm kind of done with Christmas. Like I'm done with the Christmas message.
Yeah.
I'm done with the Christmas service. And I just said, I'm done celebrating the birth of Jesus. I want to celebrate and be with Jesus. Like I'm getting to the point where it's like, I want to just be with him. I don't want to celebrate it here anymore. I'm kind of, and so in the midst of that, he's, I told you before we started, this is like I'm a weirdo with Christmas sweaters, one of 30, and I usually wear them all December. I've won a sweater once this month because I've just been like, I don't even want to do it. So in marriage, in life, the enemy is going to be right there to say, discourage us, like don't do it, don't put the effort in. But yeah, I would say for us, the life giving is for sure getting away. Dates are good, but dates are like, all right, what are we gonna do? We'll go eat. Okay, we'll go see a movie that we're gonna walk out and go, that was stupid. That was a waste of $20. Right. So if we can get away, it's huge.
Yeah, it's it's almost a rekindling of the friendship, huh? Because life is so busy and there's just so much going on that like you never. Like while you're trying to have conversations, even at night or during the day, it's like, it's almost, there are just way too many things that have to be done, way too many distractions, the kids this, work that, all of these things that stack up during the day that you have to do that you never, I don't know what it is. It's like what it almost takes, like, let's just say you get on the plane or you get in the car and you start driving to go on your trip, and it almost takes like, maybe 2 to 5 hours just to detox, from that. And then like the first day, right? And then like you finally enter into like this calm, space where you're fully alive and you can really spend time with each other. And it's I got 5, 3, and 1 right now. So we're in that season, Phil, And so we just realized that most of our trips are going to be with our kids at this point, and trying to figure out creative ways, to get away and be quiet and to spend time together and continue to rebuild. And, that season of young kids is like so sweet, it's like the sweet, just their little faces and their little things and all that stuff, but just such an unbelievably busy time, and it just flies by. And so we're trying to both cherish it and cherish each other and not, pull each other's hair out. Well, mine's already gone, but you know what I mean? It's just this wild season and then throw ministry on top of that as well. And so we're constantly in this generation, I'm trying to encourage to fight, for your marriage and to whatever is refreshing, whatever is good, whatever really you find yourself blessed doing, just get on doing it. I'll never forget a mentor told me, he said, boys, there's not a lot of things you should go into debt for, but one of the things I would always just make sure and happen is like, you know what, if we need to do a vacation, like we're just going to do it. I'm just going to go for it. Even if it costs me, I'll figure out how to pay it, but this is the thing. We got to make these memories. We got to get on doing these things. It's really good, because it's the same thing. I kind of feel like throughout the year, I can't find time and I'm always trying to piece it together. And then I commit to a lot of people's stuff. And then I can't find time to like pull it all back. And I find myself trying to catch up, but, I don't know. Katie and I have been trying to talk these things through and really even for 2024, trying to plan, to figure out how we can make sure we treat some time with the kids and then some time for ourselves as well. And to make sure that the marriage, it's just not fun. It's just not fun if we're not, everybody can just plow through and just keep going. But it's like, we might probably just have some fun along the way and enjoy each other and enjoy this before all this blows by. And we find ourselves empty nesting and, wondering what to do.
I think we're in a season where it's like the world is telling people you can't have fun anymore. It's just, it's weird, and I think that too, laughing together is huge. If you can laugh. And I think too, for husbands, do things that you normally wouldn't do, that your wife would be into, I think is huge. I hate roller coasters. Hate them. My wife loves them. But I remember this was when we were early on in our marriage. We were at the fair, the Del Mar Fair, and the zipper. I don't know if you know what the zipper is, but it's like the one that goes. It goes like kind of like this.
That thing's dangerous.
Yeah, you're in the thing, and it's flipping around while you're in it.
It's like a double flipping, right? The whole thing is flipping plus the.
So she's like, I want to go on the zipper. I'm like, I'm not going on the zipper with you. So she gets in line. She's in line by herself. I'm standing over like a total dork, just and I was just like, all right, I'm gonna get in line. I'm gonna go on the zipper with her. And I get in the zipper with her, and it's literally, it's fairground rides. So in my mind, I'm looking. So we're in this it's tiny. I'm a big dude. It's tiny. And it's like the cage door closes, and I swear it's like a gate latch, that with some maybe twine holding the thing, closed. And she's realizing, because I'm in it, that if she starts moving, she can get the whole thing, because I'm, the weight of me inside of me, she's like, I can get this thing flipping like crazy. So and I'm literally the whole time just slamming against the door, right? No. And she was laughing, like, the way I describe it was like a witch's laugh. She was like going crazy. And I was like, I remember I literally, I screamed at the top of my lungs, if you don't shut up, I'm going to punch you in your face. Like, I was so like, I thought I was going to fall out of this. So that's one of her stories. She'll always tell people.
She loves it.
But it's like, he was going to punch me in my face. It caused her to laugh even more. She was like, this is hilarious. And she boxes, so she would, before I could even punch her, I'd be down for the count. But do things that you would normally wouldn't do, but they would do. I think it's huge.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
Bill, you, man, that's what I love about you. You'll never hesitate to try to make the brothers laugh and lighten things up, and let's have a good time, and like ministry's so serious, and it's so heavy, and we carry all this stuff, and it's like, let's have the oil of gladness, upon us. Like, let's enjoy life. Like, let's get on laughing and goofing off with each other and keeping the brother. It was a way of disarming, one another and just having a good time. And one of the things I love about you, but Phil, we've done like 2 hours, I think. So,
wow.
So we should go get some lunch. But I just want to say,
and I'm charging you by the minute. This is crazy.
But I just want to say, thanks for your ministry. Thanks for loving people right where they're at. Your demonstration of that, just, I don't know, the touch of Jesus, in real time is powerful, and I think we need more of that in this day and age. I think it impacts the world far greater than maybe these large events or things. God can use them, but there's nothing like the personal touch and the real community and the real shepherding. And I think that we might be missing that a little bit. And so I love that you're trying to lead in that. You're trying to help in that, and it's impacted my life. And yeah, man, love doing ministry alongside you, running with you, and believing that God has a few more decades in us. Continue to serve here in
Awesome.
Southern California. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
thanks for sharing the stories and wisdom.
It's been a good time.
Let's go get some lunch.
Okay.